It is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you to the webinar titled The New EU Arctic Policy and Research and Innovation. This webinar is jointly organized by the European Polar Board, EU-PolarNet 2 project, and the EU Polar Cluster. My name is Renuka Badhe, and I serve as the Executive Secretary of the EU Polar Board. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you with Nicole Bibo, who is the coordinator of EU-PolarNet project as well. Let's get this webinar started with a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to the EU-PolarNet as well as EU Polar Board YouTube pages. For all of your attendees, the microphones and cameras have automatically been turned off, so you don't have to worry about that. If you're having any trouble, you can use the chat box and ask us for assistance. The full program today is available on the EU-PolarNet website, and I will copy the link for that in the chat for you in a minute. As we go, we will have 7 panelists speaking today. If you have any specific questions for them, please use the Q&A box, which is available at the bottom of the screen. Please do not use the general chat box unless it is for technical issues that you would like help with. We will address the questions that we have when we can in the discussion session at the end, which will be chaired by Nicole. If you have questions as we are going along, please feel free to add them to the Q&A box when the speakers are already speaking. We will have the first 60 minutes for talks, and then it will be followed by a discussion. We don't have a code of conduct as such for today's webinar, but what's most important to remember is that we create a respectful atmosphere. We listen and ask questions with an open mind. So please know that any abuse or harassment of any kind will not be tolerated. So after the housekeeping is done, it is an absolute pleasure to introduce Michael Mann, who is our first speaker today, and he has been the special envoy for Arctic matters since last year. Prior to that, he was the EU ambassador to Iceland, and he's served on a range of high-level positions within the European Commission. Michael, you're on now.
Thank you very much, Renuka. Apologies for being slightly late, a slight technical problem. You can tell I'm not a scientist. Anyway, thank you very much for asking me to speak to you this morning. And it's very good in particular to be speaking to a group of experts and researchers in the EU's polar research community. From the very beginning of the EU's involvement in the Arctic, science, research and innovation have played, of course, a pivotal role. And the work that you do provides the crucial basis for so much EU policy making on biodiversity, on the accelerating transformations in the Arctic, and on adaptation to climate change, among many other things. And of course, the close links between innovation and business in the Arctic will be vital in creating the conditions necessary for the kind of sustainable economic development which will be needed to maintain the Arctic regions as dynamic living places in the future. European Arctic research has also, of course, been a fantastic basis for reaching out to our international partners. I cannot, as the Special Envoy for Arctic Matters, overstate the importance of science diplomacy to the success of the EU's engagement in the Arctic and our broader international relations. As you know, on October the 13th, the High Representative and the Commission unveiled the EU's updated Arctic policy. In the 5 years since our previous policy document, the situation in the Arctic has changed dramatically. Climate change has accelerated rapidly. The Arctic is heating up almost 3 times faster than the global average. Biodiversity and traditional livelihoods are under growing threat. As the ice recedes, geopolitical interest in the Arctic has increased, and new players such as China have become attracted by the possibility of easier access to resources and to transport routes. And military activity, especially by the Russians, has also increased. As a major economic and geopolitical player with territory in the Arctic, the EU has to react to these challenges. Our engagement in the Arctic is therefore a necessity, and we also believe it can be a major source for good. The new joint communication is indeed an update on our previous Arctic policy document from 2016, but it's also broader, more target-orientated, and more ambitious. The three key priorities remain the same: climate action and environmental protection, sustainable development, and international cooperation. A consistent theme throughout the document is the need to base all that we do in the Arctic on solid science and research, and to encourage closer links between the scientific community on the one hand and innovative businesses and local communities, in particular the indigenous peoples, on the other. For the first time, an EU Arctic policy contains a separate chapter on the geopolitics of the Arctic and how the EU sees itself fitting into the evolving situation. Our philosophy is best summed up in the communication's title: a stronger EU engagement for a peaceful, sustainable, and prosperous Arctic. To borrow a phrase from a previous Finnish Prime Minister, what we want is more EU in the Arctic and more Arctic in the EU. That means mainstreaming Arctic matters in our contacts with other countries and international organizations, and also encouraging EU policymakers to take more account of the Arctic in our future policy making. The new communication, of course, focuses very strongly on the role research and innovation will play in all this. It underlines the importance of continuing with vital work that's already ongoing, for example, on reducing emissions of black carbon. It also proposes new avenues of research, in particular into the thawing of permafrost, which will be one of the biggest challenges that we face in the coming decades. Thanks to the expertise and commitment of you and all your colleagues, I'm certain that EU polar research will in future go from strength to strength. Thank you very much, and I wish you a successful conference today.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was quite inspirational. We have our next speaker, Raoul Goulet. And Raphael has served as the head of Unit for International Ocean Governance, Law of the Seas and Arctic Policy in the DG for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries of the European Commission. Previously, he's headed the Unit for Public Interest Services. And he has also held various positions, including leadership positions within the European Commission. He will introduce the new EU Arctic policy to us. Raphael, please.
Many thanks, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and thanks to Michael for his introduction on our joint communication. I can add a few words on the importance of research for the European Union's Arctic policy, both in relation to climate change environment and to the Arctic inhabitants. The Arctic is warming up faster than the rest of the planet. Forest fires are increasing in some parts of the region, and collapsing infrastructure led last summer to a huge oil slick. The melting of ice and thawing of permafrost in the Arctic further accelerate climate change and have huge knock-on effects, not only felt by Europeans, but also throughout the world. In this context, and in line with the European Green Deal, our EU Arctic policy covers the EU's commitments to contribute to slowing the effects of climate change. It also supports the sustainable development of the region to the benefit of its population. To achieve a sustainable Arctic, progress must be made on our understanding of the effects of climate change on the Arctic and its inhabitants. So you will clearly understand from this that research is at the core of the EU's policies and actions in the Arctic. We indeed must continue to bridge our knowledge gaps. The EU has already invested more than 200 million euros in Arctic-related research in the Horizon 2020 between 2014 and 2020, and will continue to do so via the Horizon Europe program. Our space programs are also essential to gather data. For example, Copernicus operates a dedicated Arctic monitoring and forecasting center. No one can address the climate change challenge on its own, and we all face its consequences. So we must use this challenge as an opportunity to foster dialogue and cooperation. And we believe that international cooperation in terms of research is essential. The EU has built strong international networks on Arctic research, such as a diplomatic tool, including bilateral science and technology cooperation agreements with Canada, Russia, and the US. Since 2016, the EU has supported science diplomacy via the Arctic Science Ministerial meetings. Our research efforts will continue to foster cooperation with international partners in the Arctic based on the principles of multilateralism, openness, and reciprocity. For example, we want to use the Northern Dimension program to work with Russia on black carbon emissions. Our research is also key to ensure the safety and security of the inhabitants of the Arctic. At the EU Arctic Forum we organized 2 weeks ago, Mr. Thomas Ingemann-Nielsen from the Nunatsiaruk project highlighted the risks posed by permafrost thaw to infrastructure and the need to build local capacity. Further research is needed to develop adaptation and mitigation measures to the ongoing changes in the region. Research is also key to enhance an inclusive and sustainable development of the Arctic. Innovative technologies related to satellites, big data, artificial intelligence, and advanced modeling can enable sectors such as shipping, fisheries, and tourism to improve their sustainability and circularity. On-site expeditions or spatial monitoring provide invaluable information on the Arctic. However, these cannot replace the historic and local knowledge of the unique Arctic ecosystems held by local and indigenous peoples. And this is why most Arctic research projects funded by the EU engage with local and indigenous peoples. We strive to further cooperate in this field, notably on the creation and the execution of our research programs. We also need to better understand the social and demographic impact of the changes in the Arctic. And again, there we will work on this with local and indigenous peoples to broaden the range of Arctic research. So I look forward to learn more on your research, and thank you very much for your work, for your expertise and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raphael. Sylvia Nemeth is our next speaker, and Sylvia currently serves as the Deputy Head of the Healthy Oceans and Seas Unit in DG Research and Innovation, working on promoting the sustainable use of the value chains of marine resources. She also has very extensive experience both in international research and innovation and also international cooperation. So she is the perfect person to talk about the EU contribution to Arctic research. Sylvia, please.
Good morning, thanks a lot. So firstly, let me start with congratulating the EU-PolarNet and the European Polar Board for organizing this webinar so timely, right after the launch of the new EU policy for the Arctic. I'm very interested to be part of this conversation and also to listen to researchers' perspective that can help us to identify the challenges that lie ahead of us. I also want to greet the fellow panelists and thank Mann and Raoul Goulet for responding to this invitation and taking part in this event. I think we all agree that linking research and policy is a great endeavor, and this is going to serve, of course, the purposes of evidence-based policy making. The Research and Innovation Framework Program is there to help and help on the Arctic aspects, and also to be in line with the general objectives of the European Green Deal. I would like to underline that the new program Horizon Europe will continue to support Arctic research. It is one of the Horizon 2020 program has already been a major funder for Arctic research, and in general to ensure the links and international cooperation on research and innovation towards a sustainable Arctic. So I think it's a very, very good contribution to the new joint communication on the Arctic and the work that we intend to undertake in Horizon Europe. In particular, I would like to highlight a couple of instruments and activities we are working with that are of relevance for the Arctic. We do have the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance, where this year a pole-to-pole dimension has been confirmed in the Azores Ministerial Conference. This is quite important, and we intend to reinforce the existing links between Atlantic and Arctic international collaboration initiatives in this basin. So the proposed scope will give the possibility to start exchanges between communities that have not had the chance to speak with each other and exchange information on research and innovation, also to undertake research and innovation activities linking challenges that the Atlantic experience may be relevant for the Arctic, given the impacts of climate change. I would also like to highlight another important instrument of Horizon Europe, which is the Restore Our Oceans and Waters by 2030 mission, the so-called Ocean Mission, which will have a specific lighthouse for the Atlantic and Arctic. This is again going in the same direction what I said of linking the Atlantic and the Arctic. This will focus on targeting marine ecosystem restoration in coastal communities that are particularly vulnerable to the risks of sea level rise. The lighthouse will develop, test, and implement nature-based solutions to enhance the coastal resilience and build resilient coastal ecosystems such as oyster reefs, kelp forest, wetlands, salt marshes within the area of coastal cities and communities as well. I think the mission is a great opportunity, and this lighthouse to build a community around the objectives of restoring our oceans. And here there is a very important dialogue with citizens and with researchers. I think researchers will have a key role to contribute to this work. We had last week the EU Arctic Stakeholder Forum, where the EU's strong engagement for the Arctic was confirmed, including for research and innovation and for the dialogue with indigenous peoples for the Arctic. I would like to stress the importance we give to this dialogue, to involve Arctic indigenous peoples in research work, and to co-create the activities that we need to focus on for the futures. Recent studies of the Joint Research Center have also confirmed that involving indigenous communities in policy design, holders of traditional knowledge, can be very important in creating a holistic view on some of the issues that we need to face and the solutions that we are trying to work out for them. In this context, in the EU Arctic Stakeholders Forum, Commissioner Gabriel announced the involvement of, or the selection of, an indigenous fellow in the Youth Ambassador Program, the very successful Youth Ambassador Program of the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. So this is also a way how we walk our talk, and we are trying to make this happen. Michael spoke about the science diplomacy efforts for the Arctic, and indeed I want to confirm the importance we give to the Arctic Science Ministerial meetings. The Arctic Science Ministerial meeting, the third one, took place in May, where again the importance of dialogue with indigenous peoples was highlighted. I'm looking forward to discuss a bit further the research needs, the issues at stake. We are all aware, of course, of some of the major issues like the thawing permafrost, the sea level rise I mentioned, a number of issues. But as I said, I'm looking forward to be part of this dialogue, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sylvia, for that really fantastic summary of all of the opportunities and things that everyone has to look forward to in the coming few years. We now shift to European and polar research coordination. This is exemplified by the EU Polar Cluster, which is a network of Horizon 2020 and Framework 7 funded polar projects. We have a very wide range of Arctic, Antarctic, and Southern Ocean, and also projects that work on both polar regions as part of the EU Polar Cluster. The EU Polar Cluster is coordinated jointly with the British Antarctic Survey by the EPB. And today we'll have Elena Ford, who coordinates it from the British Antarctic Survey, speaking about it and giving you some more information. So Elena, please.
Thank you, Anuka. Let me just move that out of the way. So the presentation I've got here is going to be a quick overview of these three sort of coordinating organisations. So there's EU Polar Cluster, EU-PolarNet, and the European Polar Board. So just be a quick look at those. And starting with the EU Polar Cluster, the aim of this is something that's formed from a bottom up from just an Arctic cluster a couple of years ago, and is now a large group of projects and organisations that are, the aim is to bring them together to increase our impact and our legacy. Excuse me. There's further information on our website and on our social media, which I've got at the end for all of these as well. We are working together through our objectives, which are on creating synergies between the activities that are planned through each of the members to increase our impact and our visibility of our research in the polar regions. We are pulling our resources together to increase our the efforts, but this is both on our personnel efforts and financial and in-kind contributions. We can increase our knowledge sharing, and we also are maintaining the legacy of those projects that have finished beyond the end of their lifetime. And we have many joint activities such as this webinar, activities on COP and other events that we've planned together through various different types of activities. All of our organisations and projects, our members are grouped into Arctic and Polar and Antarctic projects. So these overlapping themes also then are organised through task groups. So we have, at the moment, we have 5 task groups on communication and dissemination, on stakeholder engagement, data management, education and training, and our newest one this year is on policy advice. We are also going to be setting up a new task group on observations in through a new project in Arctic Passion in the coming months. So I haven't got time to go into detail on these, but there's lots of different activities through all of these task groups. There's more information on the on all of these on the Polar Cluster website, and updates on specific events that these task groups create are on various social media in various places. Oh no, my computer seems to have frozen. That is entirely unhelpful. This PowerPoint is just frozen. That's annoying. Hopefully I'll catch up shortly to show you a slide of an awful lot of projects that we have now. We have 23 projects on the list at the moment. Some of those have recently ended. As I was saying, we have polar projects. So we have, is your screen sharing now working? Thank you, Joseph. So we have polar projects and Arctic projects and Antarctic projects. There's the list of them there. You're going to hear from a bit more detail about 3 of those shortly. In addition to these short-term projects, we also have 2 organisations that are ongoing. So that's the Svalbard Integrated Observing System, SIOS, on the top right there, and on the European Polar Board, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So those projects and organisations make up our members of the cluster. Next slide, please. That doesn't seem to be. Joseph, can you go on to the next slide? Or is it just not showing me?
It should be
thank you. EU-PolarNet 2 is coordinating and co-designing the European research area. So this is one of the organisations that is coordinating this webinar, and we also coordinate the cluster. So this is funding my role in this as well. So this is great. The Commission have now started adding the funding in for this. What was a bottom-up approach has now got a proper role within projects like EU-PolarNet. This is led by Nicole Bieber, who we will be hearing from, who's going to chair the session at the end. Next slide, please. So EU-PolarNet 2 started off from EU-PolarNet 1, looking at the EU and national polar strategies, and took input from society. We are now bringing through, if you click on again, Joseph, through EU-PolarNet 2, it's co-designing this platform for European polar research, providing policy advice. So it's a lot more than just the coordinating of the cluster. There's a lot of other inputs as needed here, in creating as well the preparation of the EPCO, which if you click again is the European Polar Coordination Office. So this is going to provide a long-term coordination role beyond the lifetime of EU-PolarNet 2, and this will be coordinated through the European Polar Board. So if you can go on to the next slide, we will see an overview of some of the key things that the European Polar Board do. They are an independent organisation with 28 member organisations. So this includes research institutes, logistic operators, funding agencies, scientific academies, government ministries, and is looking at the Arctic and Antarctic as well, to look at knowledge sharing and best practices, and joint activities again, such as this and other European-wide polar coordination. Some of the flagship activities that they have been doing are looking through the action groups on the right. So the international cooperation, as we mentioned earlier, the Russian the relations and links have been needed ever more. So that's something they've been working a lot within the International Cooperation Action Group. The Environmental Impacts Action Group has compiled environmental best practices for polar research and logistics. The Infrastructure Action Group has created the Polar Research Catalogue, Infrastructure Catalogue, you can see on the left there, which is accessible from their website, which is on the bottom there, or on the final slide as well. And upcoming, keep an eye on their social media website for the Polar Dex, which is something that is being developed as a new online tool for discovery, planning and exploration of research infrastructures, logistic plans, again in the Arctic and Antarctic. And the next slide, please. So the other role, as I've indicated there, is that the European Polar Board play a key role in the projects such as EU-PolarNet 2 and these other EU funded projects and beyond, and that is then going to be essential as they continue to work on the European EPCO, the Coordination Office, in due course once that has been set up through EU-PolarNet 2. So a central and ongoing role there. And then the last slide, please, is for further information. So we have websites for all of these. Have got lots more detail, and which also in the websites in the chat as well, and are nicely coordinated looking. Our Twitter and other social media hashtags are on there as well. So please do follow us if you aren't already, and let us know if you've got any more questions. Just a flying overview of things there. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Elena, for that short and even then comprehensive overview.
Yeah. Sorry about the IT.
Not a problem. I think it went on quite splendidly. Next, we have to act, and that's the topic of our talk, given by the coordinator of the project Nunattaryuk, Uglantui. The title of his talk is about permafrost thaw, and it's time to act. The project Nunattaryuk will determine the impacts of thawing coastal and subsea permafrost on the global climate. and will develop targeted and co-designed adaptation and mitigation strategies for the Arctic coastal population. And I think Ug will give us further information about Nunatsiaq. Ug, please.
Yeah, thank you, Renuka. And really, I'm talking on behalf of the Nunatsiaq project, but also on the recently funded Arctic Patient project, in which we at AVI operate, if you wish, the permafrost pilot service. So it's a small component of Arctic Patient, yet a very relevant one. So I'm not the only one to say that it's time to act. If you read the new communication, which I believe a link has been provided for in the chat, you will see that the EU is actually saying that thawing permafrost is one of its main foci for the years to come. And there is a list of items to be covered or that are deemed strategic. And I'm going to try to show you how we do cover them in Nunatsiaq and also in Arctic Patient, but also have some ideas on how to implement some of the objectives that are listed in this strategy. I did a quick exercise, which is to go through the new communication and make a word cloud, and this is what stemmed out of that analysis. And in orange, I try to highlight maybe the keywords we could most relate to in Nunatsiaq. And there are many of those. And on the very top of the screen here, you will see permafrost. And permafrost is cited 19 times in this strategy, which is quite a bit, and shows that really the EU has renewed its commitment to permafrost research and is intending to do so over the years to come. So this is something we're taking very seriously and already working on ideas to see how we can do that best. What is permafrost? Well, it's what you see on that picture. It's a mud, if you want, that is frozen most of the time. It can be rock, it can be anything that you find under the ground, but it's basically ground that remains frozen during the summer. And that ground is hosting a vast quantities of carbon. This is the current, or actually that number is outdated, but the number of in gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere. And this is what we think is in the permafrost. And obviously, when you start thawing permafrost from the top or from the side laterally, then you get a lot of that carbon being released in the environment and ultimately possibly into the atmosphere. And that is very worrying for the years to come. Why is it worrying? Because permafrost is retreating quite dramatically. This is a map that is showing you the state of permafrost. And if you look at the different colors, this is something we refer to continuous or discontinuous permafrost. Discontinuous meaning that it's maybe not everywhere in the landscape, but it's there present. And this is the status in the year 2003. Then that was in 2010, and this is where we were in 2017. And we are now in 2021, and that area has reduced again dramatically. So the permafrost is warming, permafrost is changing quite dramatically. And you can see here that many areas that were previously frozen are not frozen anymore. And that is going to be one of the main challenges for engineering and for communities that are located on permafrost. The other threat to permafrost is the erosion of permafrost. Here I'm showing you some data from Stokes Point in northwestern Canada. This is Anna, my former PhD student, who's standing in front of a very ice-rich cliff you see there here. And she computed rates of erosion or coastal erosion for that section of coast. And this is the erosion in the 50s to the 70s. It doubled in the period from the 70s to 1996. Then in 1996 to 2007, that erosion rise has risen to 2 meters a year, which is very substantial. If you think of 2 meters a year in European terms, this would be incredibly threatening for any kind of coastal community. And these are the rates for the period 2007 to 2015, 8.8 meters a year. And I can tell you that the rate is actually higher over the later period. So a dramatic increase in erosion, which raises a lot of issues for infrastructure located at the coast, communities, cultural sites that are harvesting camps that are located along the coast. So what do we do in the project to tackle this? A series of things. First, Nunatsiaq, which means land sea in Inuvialuktun, is a project that is working really at the pan-Arctic level, maybe less in the European continental Arctic, and actually we have a very strong focus on the Canadian Arctic, so in the Beaufort Sea area and in the Nordic area. So very strong transatlantic efforts here to coordinate permafrost research, also with our Canadian and American partners, and of course with the Greenlandic partners. We do work in a lot of communities together with the community. And here I must emphasize that we're not doing that just because it's written in the project. What we've done is to include representatives from the communities in the leadership. So in our executive committee in Nunatayuk, we have a representative who's from Aklavik, who is actually guiding some of the efforts that we're doing in the project. And in the project, we're really much taking advantage of our other activities from the Polar Cluster. I think that's what Elena just emphasized. And here, again, let me give you an example. This is a cruise that just took place in September, October on board of the Amundsen. This is a cruise that was funded by an EU project called EEAS. And this was a Nunatayuk initiative to actually apply for this cruise to actually look here on the shelf of the Beaufort Sea at the fate of all the sediment that is being released by that erosion, and to understand whether it lands on the shelf or it's being used in the coastal ecosystem. What we're also doing, again, in the Polar Cluster is to partner with Arctic Patient, as this is, and here what we're really doing is to prop up and support the efforts on the Global Terrestrial Network for Permafrost. This is a observing network with all the stations measuring permafrost temperature in the world. You have here on that diagram an example of where those stations are located on the top, and a couple of curves showing the increase in permafrost temperature. And what we're working on is providing an update on this temperature increase towards the end of the Arctic Patient project. Now, let me give you a couple of snippets of what we've done that could contribute to the strategy. Here, this diagram is showing you the results from modeling that we've done. This is the first time that coastal erosion for the Arctic is being included in an Earth system model. This is something that was done by our partners at NPI in Hamburg. I'm showing you on that diagram the time on the x-axis and the erosion in meters per year over time. And this is what we know and what we've seen until now. Erosion that is mostly below 1 meter per year. On average in the Arctic, we think it was about 0.6 meters per year until very recently when it started to increase. And if we look at the next years to come, this is what we expect with two different kind of scenarios from the IPCC. A very substantial increase with rates of erosion with an extreme scenario rising up to 3 meters per year in the circumarctic. This is very substantial and could have grave consequences for a lot of the coastal communities. What we've also done is to look at Sabzi Permafrost. You know that in the strategy it clearly addresses the issue of gas hydrates that are located under the shelves of the Arctic, but there was no reliable map of Sabzi Permafrost, and this is something we produced in the project. The Sabzi Permafrost is permafrost that is located under the water, so under the shelves in the Arctic, and is shown here in blue. This is a map created by Paul Overdune, and this is a very nice product that will help to calibrate and validate a lot of the models that we are now working on in the project to include Sabzi Permafrost in some of the Earth system models. The other thing that we've done, because we are a very multidisciplinary project, I forgot to say that we really have, in terms of scientists, 50% natural scientists and 50% social scientists. And I think that's quite unique and is very, very fruitful. So we're working with health scientists here. That's the team in Italy who is looking at the anthrax outbreaks. And what they try to do is to look at the impact of the thawing of permafrost. We call that the thawing of the active layer. The active layer is a layer on top that thaws in the summer, and try to look at increases in this active layer thaw depth. So that's what you see at the bottom here, the thaw depth extending, and whether that has an impact on the potential impacts of anthrax outbreaks. And here are the results. Here you can see that with increasing thaw depths, and the two sets of bars here are two different variations of the model, but you see that there is a consistent increase in the anthrax incidence rate. And that is mostly because the anthrax can actually remain in the active layer over a longer time period over several years in these kind of conditions. Now, the way I talked about the coast here is very much as an abstract thing where permafrost is lying in front of the sea and it's being eroded or it's being warmed by the atmosphere, but this is not how it is. Actually, at the coast of the Arctic, there are many, many coastal communities. Here, Tuktoyaktuk, but I'm going to give you one example, which is actually from Greenland, where you can see the direct impact of permafrost thaw. This is Kanak in Greenland, and that is data from Thomas Ingemann Nielsen that Raphael mentioned earlier. And it's showing you the communities, the way it was planned in 1961 on a fan here close to the coast. And that community has grown considerably. This is the state of the community right now, so that's in 2018. And what is shown on that map here is an effort that we've done together with the community, or Thomas, to actually map the degree of damage to the housing conditions. And most of that damage is actually linked to permafrost subsidence, to permafrost thaw. And a lot of the, so all of the red buildings here are in a very bad housing conditions. And let me show you what that means. This is buildings where we see a lot of cracks. We see a lot of those tiles here falling down from the wall, and some very ad hoc solution to try to solve it. Look at this wall here that is being lifted from the floor, or people trying to fix very ad hoc by putting some pieces of wood here to level the floor again. In this situation, we would say that 40% of the housing units here are in a state that would elsewhere be deemed unfit for living. So dramatic consequences for this community. And this is obviously not the only community in the Arctic that is undergoing some changes. What we're also doing in the project is really to assess the number, or to create some basic numbers on permafrost people. Why permafrost people is a weird, if you want, a kind of a word, but what I mean by that is to understand how many people live on permafrost, how many indigenous people live on permafrost, and where. And this will help us to understand the scale of the impacts on people from permafrost thaw. This is a map that, or this data was compiled by Justine Ramage, and there is a paper that was published this year, and this map is going to be part of an upcoming product we want to release in 2023, which is called the Atlas on Arctic Permafrost. And one of the ideas is to use some of these beautiful maps that are provided by Levi Westerveld at Grid Arendal to be put in the exhibition that we maybe want to put in Brussels. We think that would be a very nice product to raise awareness about the impacts of thawing permafrost. Here are a couple of numbers stemming from that paper. You see that a lot of different kind of infrastructure located in the permafrost, a substantial amount of people there. A lot of those people are not going to be on permafrost anymore, only in 30 years from now. In 2050, 46.7% of the settlements that are currently on permafrost are not going to be on permafrost anymore. So imagine the impacts when you build these settlements for permafrost conditions, and suddenly you have a ground that is thawing, subsiding, with dramatic consequences for the infrastructure. I conclude this presentation that saying what is essential in our project is a partnership with this community. We devised a project to last for 5 years. It's now lasting for 6 years because it was extended because of COVID. And that time was essential. So many projects are created for 3 or 4 years, and you create connections and partnerships with communities, and it becomes very challenging to sustain them. We've done things a bit differently and choosing to have a longer time span for the project. And this was very important in creating those partnerships, nurturing them. Now I think I can say that I have many friends in the community of Aklavik. This is the Hunters and Trappers community with 2 of our researchers on the project. And this partnership is essential to continuing our activity. And I'm hoping we'll be given the opportunity to continue working with these local communities, the way we've done. The truth is that trust has to be earned and should come only after the passage of time. And you can create all kinds of structures, but it doesn't replace the interaction you have from person to person. And that is really essential to create these partnerships in the Arctic. So where do we go from here? Well, we've done some effort in the project to try to look at what we could and should do. And we've done that this year, actually having a lot of brainstorming to do that. And this is going to feed directly into EU-PolarNet 2 and hopefully into the strategy for future research ideas. And here are a couple of ideas that we're working on in terms of permafrost research. What I would like to emphasize is that really the great thing about this project is that it integrated all of the activities that are here and people talk to each other. So we understood how these global projections that we are doing mattered for local communities, how we are able to downscale some of the activities we are doing at the local level, and how to feed some of the local input, concerns, awareness, and questions into these global efforts to answer those questions. So this interaction is key, and I think this is also something we want to continue. But again, as I said, I think what is essential and we would like to have in the future is really to build on these community partnerships. We've done so many great things in partnering with people on site, and I think this is really something we want to build on. I'll finish by saying that I'm only there because I have a fantastic team, people that work hard and are basically very happy, I believe, to hang out together. And this is a part that is not to underestimate in a project, that you create the conditions to have a very good working environment. And I believe that we have that in our project. And this is why I would like to continue working with these people maybe for the next couple of years, because this is an incredibly fruitful project and a great team. And here's our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and web presence. You can go there. I would love it if you could all give us a like on Facebook. That would prop up our stats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ug. Super important messages there. Also, good to hear about your experiences with working with communities in the North. Please do feel free, audience, please do feel free to ask any questions to our speakers through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. I'm sure the panelists are waiting for some nice and juicy questions to tackle during the discussion session, which will start in about 10 or so minutes from now. Next, we have the project Ecotip, and Ecotip hopes to predict the potential tipping points of key biological ecosystem functions in the Arctic seas, which will possibly happen in the face of climate change and other pressures. Ecotip also works closely with fishing communities in Greenland and other stakeholders to understand the effects of biodiversity and ecosystem changes on society, and also they look at how best to reduce, mitigate, and adapt to these changes. We have Sigrun Jonasdottir, who will introduce Ecotip to all of us. In her talk, Climate Change Threatens the Basis of the Arctic Marine Food Web. Sigrun, please.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited to present Ecotip on behalf of 16 partners. I am located at Technical University of Denmark, and Ecotip is a European-funded project that deals with consequences of climate change at the base of the Arctic marine food web. So with the consequences of climate change on the ecosystem services that are, that the marine ecosystem provides. So it contributes to the EU Arctic strategy by investigating causes and consequences of climate on the from everything from the plankton to the humans here. And let me see. We can go down to here. The specifically, Ecotip addresses the EU Arctic strategy, whereas especially the ecological impacts of climate change on the environmental degradation, and their fisheries are quite important and the main commercial activity, but also and therefore because of that is kind of also the social economic impacts of this climate change. And secondly, it contributes to the sustainable development of the region that then they will benefit the future generations. We focus on fisheries productivity types and carbon sequestration in the that is the climate feedback in the marine environment, and these challenges that are posed by climate change, and also anthropogenic influences like pollution, and how it affects biodiversity loss to Arctic marine ecosystems and the services. And the consequences of these changes have also a great influence on the social economics of the people in the regions. And so we work together with the Greenlandic community to develop mitigation and adaptation options for the changes in the fisheries. So it's a big social economic impact that we try that we want to work with the local communities to find some solutions. The marine food web starts at the plankton level. So if you see my arrow here, that is the primary producers are the phytoplankton of the oceans, and they all the energy of the marine food webs starts at this level from the primary producers. They are then consumed by smaller organisms, and then again, cascade of the food web to fish and also to the pelagic fish and benthic fish and benthic communities. What is really important is the size structure of this plankton community. So in the Arctic, usually everything is big. You know, they're large phytoplankton that feed to larger copepods or larger zooplankton, and then it kind of is like a challenge or is cascaded up to then fat, healthy fish stocks. And so usually this is a size structure. So the larger they are, the energy is saved by every step in the food chain. So if it becomes a smaller system, smaller algae, then it has to go through more steps in the food chain to be able to sustain fisheries, for example. And the more energy is lost, as smaller the whole system is, the smaller the. And what we are. So what affects the size of the, we are interested in that in Ecotip to figure out what affects the size structure and if that is a challenge in the Arctic environment. Also this year, we have a large secondary producers. They are in the Arctic system, they are usually really large and they're full with this oil. This is oil sac and copepods. These organisms is called a copepod. And these are one of the main food items for the fish stocks. And because, as you see, they're very energy rich, having this oil, they are also of incredible importance for the food web in the Arctic. When another important thing is the phytoplankton, the primary producers, they accumulate after the blooms is this phytoplankton sinks to the bottom and basically gives the bottom of the benthic community food and energy for surviving, and then for also benthic fish. So what Ecotip is focusing on is how is this community challenged by climate change, and what we are looking at mainly is the effect of ice melt. And so the changes can definitely be affected by ice melting. So we are concerned about something called the ecosystem tipping points. And what we as a tipping point is that in this case, it starts with the melting of the ice. And they increases the stratification of the oceans. And that will change the pelagic ecosystem from being a well-mixed system like it is now, where there's a pulsed system where nutrients go and feed up the primary producers, so they can grow and have loads of nutrients that feeds then the large fat copepods that are then food for the loads of bigger fish, and the phytoplankton stock they feed the bottom. And this is how it is has been and is most of the places now. But with the melting of the ice, what will happen is that there will be a stratification of the water because of the freshwater layer in the top, and that will hinder this pulsing of nutrients up to the surface layer, affect be more what we call a microbial system. So it's a recirculated nutrients. The zooplankton community will be smaller, and therefore also the flux of carbon down to the bottom, the carbon sequestration, will be blocked. This would lead to smaller fish communities because of the smaller, the whole system is reduced in size. And so this in short, it is summary of this: a melting of ice will cause stratification. They will affect the nutrient input. They will impact the plankton community structure. That means directly impact the ecosystem function in the forms of fisheries and fish production. And they will also affect this, what you call the biological pump, food-food transfer, and benefit coupling, and directly into the human systems. But we are also looking at the anthropogenic sources or influences on this system by pollutants. With the melting of the ice, there's some release of some heavy metals that come with there, and we are looking at how these combination of pollutants and also increased traffic of boats, oil pollutions, will have affecting the system. So this is what we call the ecosystem tipping point if it turns from this system over to the stratified system. I will give you just very few examples of what we are doing in Ecotip, and one of this is we went to there was a cruise that we went to last summer, and to try to understand the functioning of the Arctic marine ecosystem. We went on a research vessel, Dana, that is the Danish research vessel. And there we investigated the community structure from microbes to fish larvae, and we looked at some sedimentation and benthic communities. And we are trying to learn from the past and looking at paleoceanography, seeing what has happened in the past, have there any tipping have happened in the past, and relate that then to the physics and the environmental changes that can be read from the paleo record. And then also we, of course, look at the hydrography. We took loads of samples for chemical samples to look at the heavy metals and anthropogenic influences. And all this, where we then did this in a gradient from south to north, up to the north of Disco Island from Nuuk, and then also onshore, offshore gradient. And this is because this is just new cruise. We will in next year go to the east coast of Greenland and do similar research there to cover both sides. A big part of also Ecotip is investigating shift in fish distributions, and this is as most of you know, there has been some movement of fish in some shift from the past decades from south and to north. And here is, for example, a little bit of a demonstration of what has been happening to the capelin in the Iceland Sea, and how they have distribution, both larval drift and feeding grounds have been shifting in some years. And we have a capelin a little bit as a kind of a species of interest, because we have Icelandic partners. They have great insight, and it is also in good collaboration with Greenland. And all these changes is likely to be induced by climate changes. We see new populations coming into the area of mackerel and capelin. Capelin is shifting, we say, and increased water temperatures have made some big migrations into the Erminger Sea. That is also a very commercial important species. But Ecotip is also has as a goal to communicate with the managers of the fisheries managers and other policymakers, and therefore we are interested in how this to investigate and share our findings, how to is best to use this resources. It is a challenge because these exploitable resources, they are very much fixed in time. It's very difficult to change what has been decided a few years ago or many decades ago, and so that is really a problem for the local communities there. So we will would like to see the flexible management decision-making procedures to be taken into account in this area. And the last example I'm going to give you is basically we have a huge social economic partnership in this, and where there is communication with the stakeholders and the local communities in Greenland. And we were present at the Greenland Science Week last couple of weeks ago, and where Ecotip and the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources hosted a stakeholder meeting and a workshop in Nuuk. And there were some important stakeholders from the seafood companies and from small-scale fisheries and self-government fisheries and hunting. And there was a good discussion going on, and I was not there myself, but I understand this was a very successful meeting with the stakeholders. At the same time, our partners started to interview the local fishermen. There's loads of local environmental knowledge in that that should be shared and used. And this was the first step. We started with the community around Nuuk, but they will in the future they will go and interact with the local coastal fishermen in the south and the north of Greenland. So the purpose is to learn about the local knowledge and observations of environmental change, and they have the fingers on the pulse all the time. They know what's happening, they see what's happening, and this is something that we'd like to discuss with them and share and figure out what kind of adaptations we can, the communities can work with. So this was just a little snapshot of Ecotip, and it's a project that has been running now for a little bit over a year, and we look forward to working further with it, and thank you for your attention here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Corinne Wood-Donnelly, and she's the coordinator of Just North. The title of her talk will be Envision Contributions of Just North to the Future EU Arctic Policy. Let's hear more about Just North from Corinne. Corinne, please.
Thank you, Renuka. Yes, so I'm here today to talk about Just North, which has a full title of Towards Just, Ethical and Sustainable Arctic Economies, Environments and Societies, which I appreciate is a mouthful. And I'm going to talk about our contributions and both current, ongoing, and some future contributions to EU Arctic policy as we see the project unfolding. So I wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to Just North, in part about the numbers. A number that doesn't appear on my screen is that in the EU Arctic policy, the word sustainable or sustainability appears together in combination 44 times. So it has quite a strong presence in the policy. And we see Just North as contributing, of course, to the third objective of the policy, which is about inclusive and sustainable Arctic regional development. So to tell you about how this is happening in Just North, we are funded by the EU as a research and innovation project. Uniquely, we're a social science project, so what you hear from us will be slightly different than what you hear from the STEM science projects. We have a budget of just about 6.15 million, and we're putting that to good use with 18 partners, and together we are working in a huge number of case studies, 18 case studies on Arctic economic activities. These activities include mining, fishing, reindeer herding, tourism, energy, renewable energy. There are many of these that are not listed here. And we are a team of about 70 researchers, and together we're producing 47 deliverables, which is a huge amount, and I can't cover everything here today, but they include works and materials on justice, analysis of sustainability, policy and regulatory framework recommendations. But all of these come together in what are really three major project outcomes. One of these will be a project documentary talking about issues of sustainable development in the Arctic. We will also make policy recommendations for the EU, both in terms of how to implement the current policy and possibly recommendations for a future EU Arctic policy. And we are producing a Just Score negotiation tool, which I will talk about a little bit more later. We have really big ambitions and objectives for the project. Sustainability in all its forms, social, economic, environmental, is really important for supporting and strengthening adaptive capacity and resiliency of people living in the Arctic. And we are contributing to that as much as we can. We are doing this first by challenging traditional notions of viability in economic decision-making. A lot of economic decision-making uses utilitarian rationalities, which we feel are unsustainable. And we're trying to define a new starting point for sustainable development in the Arctic by using justice and ethics to build the foundation for this. And of course, as a social science project, we're bringing social science expertise and multidisciplinary analysis to show interplays between realities of current practices and to recommend pathways towards sustainable futures. And this is based on perspectives of stakeholders to Arctic development, including the values that the different stakeholders have in regards to sustainable development in the Arctic. We include a great number of social science disciplines, geography, law, sociology, economics, history, international relations, to name a few. So it is a very multidisciplinary and multi-perspective project. And we are informing our analysis and recommendations through perspectives of justice, which include the distributional, procedural, substantive, recognitional, and retributional forms of justice, and based on principles of justice. Some of these include responsibility and recognition. So some of the contributions that we have made to, or we feel that we're making to this current policy is, first of all, we started by contributing recommendations in the 2020 public consultation process, some of which we were pleased to see made it into the language of the policy. In our current research, we're in project month 18, so we're still quite early on in the empirical aspects of our research. We're about halfway through our case studies. But as the results from these emerge in the next year, we hope that these will show where the existing economic activities fail in promoting social, economic, and environmental sustainability, and to help the EU make better policies to change this. And we're bringing social science contributions to research on societal challenges in and for the Arctic, which is very important for promoting that third objective of sustainable development for the Arctic. And we are supporting the widening EU participation in Arctic governance as a champion of good governance for the region. Finally, we will do our best to inform on pathways for promoting EU Arctic policy objectives, especially that third objective. For future EU Arctic policy, we will, through our three major deliverables, we're going to make recommendations for policy and regulatory pathways that will promote the economic development, which contributes to the EU's ambition to be a leader of good governance for the region. Through Just Score, our negotiation tool, we see potentially as an operational standard for economic development in the Arctic, which contributes to the EU's objective of creating Arctic standards for the region. It's possible that it could be used more broadly across the EU market, and we feel this tool will help create political and social cohesion towards sustainable development and ethical investments. And of course, we are providing insight on gaps in Arctic social science research for the Horizon Europe program by contributing to advisory calls that are and requests for information that come at every now and again. So we have a lot of results coming out, and we'd like you to try to keep up to date with us. We have a great number of ways for you to be able to do this. We have our social media platforms where we try to give information about the outcomes of the project as they appear. You can also visit our website at justnorth.eu and subscribe to our newsletter. Our results are starting to come out very quickly, and so now is a very good time to sign up to information about this. And so we hope you follow us as we help the EU contribute to sustainable development in the Arctic. Thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Corinne. It is my absolute pleasure now to introduce Nicole Bibo. I don't think she requires much introduction, to be honest, but Nicole will share the next session on the discussion. Nicole is a close colleague and coordinator of EU-PolarNet 2, and she's recently also been instituted as the chair of the European Polar Board. So I hand over to you, Nicole, and hopefully we have a lot of questions that the speakers will be looking forward to responding.
Thank you very much, Renuka, and thank you very much to all our speakers who did an excellent job. I guess the audience has realized that we have chosen these three projects also to show you what is already currently going on in EU research, which is closely related to the EU Arctic policy. I would like to start with a question which I would like to pose to our EU colleagues, and I don't know who want to ask. But before I ask this question, please, colleagues, this is your opportunity now. Please type your questions in the question and answer bottom, or please even raise your hand if you would like to make a personal question. So my question now to the colleagues from who wrote the EU Arctic policy is, science and research has a prominent role in the EU Arctic policy, as you stressed several times, and you can imagine that we are more than happy about that here from the research community. It would be nevertheless interesting for us to learn. We know that you made a consultation to get input for the EU Arctic policy. Did you also consult directly researchers, or did you build all the EU Arctic policy on this consultation, or did you also had some more intensive chats with some of the research groups? Because some research in the Arctic policy is very, very specific. That's why we are asking this question. I don't know who wants to answer, Michael or Raphael.
I'm happy to start, Nicole, and then maybe Raphael can fill in the gaps that I leave. Yes and no, in a way. I mean, we did a public consultation, which was a sort of 4-month process where we invited people from, all walks of life to do with the Arctic to send us something in writing. But we also did, of course, internal consultation as well. I mean, obviously, being from the EEAS and from DG MARE, we're not, aware of everything that's going on. So we reached out to our colleagues in DG Research and Innovation, who've set up this excellent event, helped set up this excellent event this morning, who really helped us a great deal. Obviously, as you say, science and research and innovation is really sort of the keystone, the sort of building block of our Arctic policy. So their input was absolutely vital, as well as GRC. But again, there was also some sort of ad hoc consultation as well. I, for example, was invited to take part in webinars with the Arctic 5 and with various different universities. So it was partly the public consultation, partly specific assistance from our expert colleagues in the Commission, and partly rather ad hoc, I guess. Obviously, we can't, from our position, get into the nitty-gritty of all the projects, but to get an impression of the fantastic work that's being done was very important, and that's why kind of science and research is present throughout our joint communication. I don't know if you want to add something, Raphael.
I mean, yeah, I think you gave exactly the right answer, in the sense that the public consultation was obviously open to anybody, and we did receive many good and interesting contributions, notably also from science bodies and researchers. But because it was basically open to everybody, we didn't systematically went and approach in addition specific stakeholders, and that indeed we got first through the stakeholders that we met at their request or where we were approached, but also, as Michael said, which was very important, and also to answer your question, Nicole, about the content. It's not, of course, just a compilation from the contributions received in the public consultation, but also a lot of hard work, and many thanks to all our colleagues who are listening today, also from the European Commission's and EEAS services, which contributed. And Michael did mention the Joint Research Center, of course, also our colleagues from DG RTD, who are more in close contacts with research bodies. So that was a great contribution to the final text. So it was not just Michael and me and our close colleagues, but I mean, and the importance of research obviously is not just because we like you, but in a way we feel comforted by what we just heard now and the many more projects, which hopefully the new communication will trigger. So it's not, we don't only want it to be a recognition of the great things which are already happening, and in most cases in a continuation, but we also wanted to highlight indeed, and Hugues mentioned it earlier on, for example, permafrost, to highlight where probably more should be done. And I was very interested, I mean, by all projects mentioned this morning, but also especially the one on sustainability, because that's rightly so. I didn't count myself. I don't know if Michael did the number of times we used it, but we really mean it. I mean, it's really part of the European Green Deal, and that's very good to have more and more research on how to best do it, so that it just not remains only a wish, but it becomes more and more reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I go now to more specific questions, which I have here in the chat, I would also, this question also goes to you and also to Sylvia. Hugues mentioned nicely in his presentation that cooperation with the requested cooperation with the indigenous communities and the local communities needs a long breath. And we also know we need to build up much more capacity, especially in the indigenous communities, so that they are able to work with us on this long run. So do you see any, let's say, tools or so, how the European Commission can how to say, advance this? So on the one hand side, giving us the opportunity to have a longer term cooperation. I know that's a bit contradictory with the usual time span of research and innovation projects, but also how we can really dedicate it, or how the indigenous colleagues can really dedicate, build up dedicated capacity to really work with us. So at the moment, it is still very difficult for them. They are a bit overloaded by all our research projects. Don't know who wants to answer. Hugues also might even able answer. But we are a bit worried that we are now building up all these trust and relations, and then the project ceases and it ends. So is there somehow a longer term perspective?
That's not for me to answer, but I would like to. The projects go, the people stay. So that's one way to look at it. It's for those people also. I mean, I'm trying to ask for a continuation, but it's for us also to do our job and to work on ways to sustain those partnerships. The beauty of those partnerships through EU projects is that you can start a dialogue. That's what we do in Nunatarik between communities across the Arctic, on not necessarily at the policy level like some indigenous organizations do it, but on a very pragmatic level looking at permafrost. And I think that's very useful, and that underpins a lot of the policies that are then articulated at the policy level. In terms of pragmatic actions, I think that some of things are very difficult to implement because of the way the funding schemes are organized. And we're not going to change that from one day to the other, but some of the things are possible. So for instance, we talk very much about co-design and co-development. A very specific request in a call formulation to have this happening ahead of the project. And I know we try to do that, but generally that is something that happens not necessarily before. It happens in a rushed way because the calls come out quite long. So maybe a longer time for the call, so that, and a specific request to implement, to address co-design and co-development for the projects that are aiming to do it. I think that would already be a step forward and a ways to include those communities. And the last thing is that for many of the communities we work with too, some are not necessarily in the EU framework. And then that requires some level of creativity in articulating a relationship as subcontractors or anything like that. So some level of flexibility here ahead in the formulation of the call would be useful, I think, in facilitating this.
If maybe I could jump in there at this point. I mean, we did have our Indigenous Peoples Dialogue a couple of weeks ago, fantastically organized by Raphael and his team. And there, that was one of the big issues. We had the Sami Council out in strength at that event, and I have to say the presentation given by John Bell, the director in DG RTD, was extremely inspiring. I mean, he was talking, you know, really from the heart about getting the Indigenous peoples involved in project development right from the word go. So I think that's very important. I think also capacity building is important for the Indigenous organisations as well, and I think there are some good signs. We have very good contact with the Sami Council. They are assisted already in the Northern Periphery and Arctic programme in terms of sort of so a certain amount of capacity building, and they're trying to raise their, you know, perhaps get their secretariat a bigger presence in Brussels as well. And also, I mean, we have said in our Arctic communication about free, prior and informed consent. That's not strictly a science issue, but of course, I think it draws, sort of makes you aware that we are very conscious of perhaps shortcomings there's been in the past. But again, the example that Hugues mentions about permafrost, I mean, there will be a need to have sort of on the ground observation of permafrost, and what better than to have the people who live there and who understand to be the people who help us with that.
If I can just compliment, I don't, sorry, or maybe Sylvia, you wanted to talk first?
No, go forward if Sylvia does not mind, and then Sylvia afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can live with that.
Thanks. No, I just wanted to say, I mean, we are aware, obviously, our funding programs are a huge machinery, so it's quite heavy, but at least on the positive side of it, and we took note of some suggestions how to maybe become more agile, but on the positive side of it, it brings at least some visibility in terms of funding for 7 years. And I'm not sure we have the same level of certainty in purely national or regional programs. So I think that is not the answer to the long term, but at least medium term, there are many possibilities. And we do, of course, the first step is the one you mentioned, which is to ask local and indigenous peoples and local population. That's obviously something to do. It's also maybe to think of different type of projects, not only to ask about their knowledge on ecosystems, for example, but also about what type of projects would make sense. And here I also think more in terms of social science. And then I think Hugues already hinted to it, but I guess Sylvia will be more able to speak about it than me, is a question about indeed not only having one project and as successful as it can be, and still hopefully these individual projects can be building blocks to contribute to enhance capacity and awareness also on our side. But then the question is also about how to involve local and indigenous peoples in not only being partnered in a project, but already in what type of project at all should be done. So in kind of the conception. But I leave Sylvia to rebound on it, because surely she will have something more intelligent to say than what I just said. Thanks.
I don't think it's more intelligent than what you said, Raphael, but it's complementing certainly. Yes, indeed, I also wanted to mention, and I think the event we had, the Arctic Stakeholder Forum, and the discussion, the panel discussion that Michael referred to, was an excellent invitation for further dialogue or to identify the problems. And we are very keen to follow up on this. I must say that with my excellent colleague Anastan, we have already started to work on this. So I think firstly we need to identify the problems. We need to identify the problems with the Sami community to see a bit what are the issues, because we can have a certain view. I think in the panel we also saw that everybody has an excellent view, but it's the people, the local people experiencing the issues that need to put this in context. Secondly, where I can complement what Raphael said, is that the framework programs, I mean, we are, I think now 9th, 10th, I don't remember, but there was a logic in why it changed into Horizon 2020 and now Horizon Europe, because these programs are much more impact focused. And I think this is very important, because this allows us indeed to put into this huge machinery that Raphael referred to some purpose, and to build up certain portfolios of discussion. So I think, Nicole, the answer is positive. We can do a number of things, but we are at the start of this, I must say, in a certain sense. Of course, on the building on the excellent projects that we have financed up to now.
Thank you very much. I have to say we are running out of time, and our webinar was supposed to end now. Nevertheless, I have, if you could stay 5 minutes more, maybe we can have 2 or 3 more questions. So I have very specific questions here to certain projects, and I would like to ask the projects to answer them directly, because we should bit focus on the overarching topics. Then I have here a question from Michael Karcher from Arctic Passion, and I want to ask Michael, or Michael as we say in German, would you like to pose this question directly to the panel? If so, then we can give you the voice. So otherwise I need to read this long question. So.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to ask the question myself, and apologies for the long question which I typed in. As those of you who are involved in Arctic Passion know, one of the long-term goals of Arctic Passion, which just started this July, is to establish communication channels with indigenous and local communities in the Arctic, so they have a long-term perspective of hearing their needs and voices heard for the future development of an Arctic observing system, which is quite essential in many aspects. And I was just wondering, what would be your take from the projects we heard from, but also particularly from the European Commission? What are your views on what can be done from our side, speaking about research and European Commission and your side, to establish those long-term channels? We will certainly talk with the indigenous communities. A lot of them are our partner in our project, but it's also important to hear from both sides how this could work. And it's not something to rush, that is clear, but maybe there are a few aspects which you could already mention, where you could see this established in a more formal way or in a more long-term way, rather than the otherwise very nice meetings or webinars. But what could be the potential formalism for that to make sure that these needs are incorporated into the future developments.
Who wants to answer? Also the project, obviously a difficult question, Michael.
Yeah, sorry. maybe more something to think about in the coming years, because I think there's really a need that those interests are incorporated, because the Arctic observing system will develop due to different usages of the Arctic, due to the climate changes. And we need to make sure that the indigenous voices are incorporated and their needs are incorporated into the developments of Copernicus and other players.
Maybe I can start to answer. I mean, you're right. One way is first, of course, to be able to understand on both sides what the expectations are. And in that sense, I think the Arctic Stakeholder Forum and the Indigenous Peoples Dialogue we had 2 weeks ago play an important role. And we'll be happy to organize the next sessions next year. But you are rightly point that one event a year is certainly not enough. So we are certainly always willing to be in regular contacts with various stakeholders. And I also want, for example, to single out a special partnership we have, for example, with the Sami Council, where we also do provide a small grant to try to help their capacity, not only to be heard in Brussels and in the European Union, but also to help them precisely building this capacity. So we try to provide tools. Let's see indeed if that can be done with other partners as well. I mean, we're really keen to have a genuine dialogue. We are less keen to formalize things and then tick the box. We did what we want to do. It needs to be meaningful and to serve a purpose. But I mean, we are certainly open on it on our side.
If I can maybe complement a bit, yes. I also think that, I mean, we need to look at this in a context. I mean, we are doing a number of projects on ocean observation, and of course, that involves the whole Atlantic, and we are doing it with very important international partners under the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. When in 2013 the Galway statement was launched, this was one of the main issues that brought us together. And I think there is no question that some of the services that the Commission is working on in terms of use of results, modelings, everything needs to be put together. We need to see, of course, specific Arctic needs as well, but there is a lot ongoing, and there will be a lot ongoing. I'm not sure about specific funding as such for individual projects, but the intention of keeping up this effort and stepping this up and keeping a very important European lead is there.
Thank you. Luc, short comment, please.
Briefly, I would say the best way to keep it, to formalize it, is to keep it very informal. And I think that echoes what Raphael was saying, is that there is some level of formal partnership to be done, for instance, with ICC or people, organizations that are active at the policy level, but there is also a lot of strain put on those organizations. They don't have an incredible capacity, and they have to answer an increasing number of requests. So I'm not only talking about the local stakeholders, but even those policy organizations have limited capacity, and that is challenging. So I think that the key here is to value the partnerships we have on the informal way. I can give you an example. I interact with the Aklavik HTC primarily through Facebook Messenger. And that is our way of communication, and that is actually very fruitful. So that needs to be articulated with a higher level. And I do think, actually, having witnessed the EU policy organized, that there is actually a very strong and positive development in the way the EU is seeing things. And that, I think that echoes what Raphael was saying. So I'm quite optimistic in the way things are developing.
Renuka, did you want to answer?
Yeah, I just had a short comment. So we were all speaking about how the duration of the projects is quite short. But we should also remember that there are organizations that are members of the EU Polar Cluster, like the European Polar Board. And these are organizations that can provide that slightly longer term support for interactions and continuing these interactions beyond when the short term projects end. But yeah, thanks, Nicole. That was all.
Thanks, Renuka. So I will now give the floor to Lena Maria Nielsen, who is waiting a long time to pose her question. And this is also then the last question. And afterwards, we close the meeting. Lena, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Lena Maria Nilsson, and I'm a new member of the EU-PolarNet 2 expert group from Umeå University, Arcum, the Arctic Research Center. And I wonder, you talk a lot about the collaboration on the European level with the Sami Council, but it's an NGO and they do a lot of good work. But do you have any efforts in having a dialogue with Sami parliamentarian representatives representing a larger spectra of the Sami people, for example, hunting and fishing Sami outside, the reindeer herding and city Sami like me?
I can answer that briefly, perhaps. I mean, certainly in my outreach, since I've been doing this job for the last year and a half, I've had a number of ad hoc contacts with Sami, the presidents of the Sami parliaments from more than one country, and also Sami parliamentarians. It's not a sort of structured thing, but I've certainly had a lot of contact with some Sami parliamentarians and, you know, hear their messages. That's what I can say to that. So there's nothing structured, but there is regular contact.
Can I just add, it looks like we were indeed a bit unlucky with our events two weeks ago, where not only from the Sami parliaments, but also from the European Parliament. At the end, all the ones we invited, and we invited 2 chairs of Sami parliaments, but none of them could join. So again, it's not the end of the story, but we certainly can do better and hope that next time our invitations will be welcomed and it will be possible, of course, see how the pandemic will evolve. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And as I said, we unfortunately run a bit over time. And I would also, first of all, I would like to ask you all to switch on your video so that we can make a picture. So those who are can do it. And secondly, I also would like to tell you that, of course, you have our support from EU-PolarNet 2, the EPB, and so on. We are there to we are supposed to do some prioritization of research themes for you for the future. And please don't hesitate to contact us and the EU Polar Cluster if you need any support for developing something. This also holds true, of course, for the representatives here from the EU Polar Cluster projects. So please also use the opportunity to feed in your ideas via EU-PolarNet 2, because this is our duty. Then, as I said, I would like to thank you very much. I also would like to ask those speakers, especially the scientific speakers who got some questions here in the question and answer box, please answer them. They are more specific. That's why I did not post them here, which was a matter of time. So I thank you very much. I think it was a very nice meeting, and I also learned a lot from the EU Polar Cluster project presentations. I'm highly impressed, and I hope we continue our good cooperation within the cluster in the future. I wish you a nice day, and I'm happy. I guess we will meet very, very often again to cooperate with each other much more strongly. So thank you very much, and yeah. Bye-bye, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.